Get it going early to finish early. Okay, so good morning, everybody, and welcome to Talking Niagara with me, Peter Giblett, and him, Dave Wheeler. Morning, Dave. How are you doing?
Good morning. We got some good stories, but I think the best one will be the one from the pointer. We'll get to that probably the second one. Make sure everybody gets online.
Yeah.
That's the one with
Well,
Mike
we're,
Cushman on it.
yeah. Okay, so basically, first start with Canadians are encountering fewer legitimate news sources on social media these days.
Yes. Now we do remember that all around the world, basically, news or governments are annoyed at social media for using intellectual content from journalistic networks, particularly like the Star or the CBC or the I don't know the
It's
Guardian,
not
whatever
governments;
else.
it's the news agencies that seem to, they're not making money, and Facebook are not making money, and there's the argument.
Well, yeah, and the argument basically is that Facebook is taking advantage of the intellectual property of journalistic enterprises around the world, basically, and here in Canada, it's no different. Uh, the first the first encounter of this, where the government stepped in and tried to make Google and particularly Facebook come up with some money for the journalism that they share. Now they reap the advertisement that they get from other people's journalism, and so the journalists like the big newspapers and things like that are insisting that Facebook and Google share some of the revenues they get from using their journalism. Well, Canada tried the same
Yeah.
thing. Now in Australia, they came to a deal. They came to a deal with Google and Facebook, and somehow there are revenues shared there. And this has happened in other places too, I believe. Now Canada has told the big social media networks like Facebook and Google, you have to, if you're going to use that, you're going to have to come up with some money. Google has tried to negotiate some money compensation, but not Facebook. Facebook says, okay, we'll comply with the law, so it just shuts off all journalism posts
No, they
in
didn't.
Canada.
They didn't comply with the law. They basically skirted the law.
Well, no, they just said our way of complying with it. If we are posting these on, so what we'll do is we just won't post that stuff on Facebook. That way, we don't have to pay for any of it. So that way,
Yeah,
we can comply with the law, and that is in
like
compliance with the law. Let's put that clearly. They are complying with the law, and how they comply with the law is not post Canadian or international news on their website or on
mind you,
their
people
media.
journalists are getting around it because there's things like SS News that are allowing them to post, and there's other ones from other countries that are getting around these as well.
But the big problem here is we found an 83% drop in news available to the average Canadian. And the big question here is when the Canadian government made these demands of Facebook and Google, were they working in the public interest? Because now news is 83% less available to Canadians. It
Yeah,
seems that only about 20% of us are active news seekers. That's like me. I've got a subscription to Niagara Falls Review and the Globe and Mail. So I am one of those people that is an active news seeker. But for most Canadians who have way too much on their plate, just living, trying to pay the bills, going to work, and all that, pick up their news in other ways. And one of the ways in which news was disseminated very efficiently was on social media. However, the argument is the big the news agencies, even the small ones, are saying we're not getting a piece of the pie. You're using our stuff and not paying us for it. Like when I get a subscription, I pay for the news I'm reading, but they're not. So basically, what the Canadian government and other governments in the past have said, you're going to have to get basically a subscription. You know, you're going to have to share your revenue. Well, Facebook says, well, we don't need it, so we're not going to put it on. And that's how we're going to apply with the law. Google, on the other hand, is still fighting it, but says it has a pool of about $100 million that it will disseminate through Canadian news agencies in order for them to be able to use it.
You search for stories, news stories. Say if you gave me, you know, I'm not frozen. If you
were
gave
frozen
me
to me, yeah.
the headline, yeah. So if you gave me the headline, Canadians are encountering, I'm fine. Canadians are, you know, if you gave me the headline, Canadians are encountering fewer legitimate news sources on social media, study finds, I could punch that into Google and I could find a dozen articles from Canadian sources about that.
Yeah, you can, but Google is complying with the law, but Facebook isn't. Try to do the same thing on Facebook.
Oh, I know, but I don't search for things on Facebook. I don't do my searches on Facebook. I do my searches on Google and other search engines.
The point here is this in the public interest? Because the Canadian public is has had 83% less exposure to news. And one of the hallmarks of a democracy is to open the field so that Canadians have sources of information. News agencies well, Mike Cushman, our listener, has said the news agencies are very censored. Yeah, of course, you can tell by the war in Gaza how much it's filtered through. You can't say certain things on American or even Canadian TV about that. Yeah, so there is overt censorship like that. There is also, each different news agency has their slant. The Star's agenda is in the liberal camp, the Sun's in the conservative camp, et cetera, et cetera. I read the Globe and Mail because I find it probably the most centrist, but being a person who pursues the news, I read every article with a grain of salt, depending on who wrote it and where it comes from and what motivated it. And that's what we should be doing as Canadians, but we should have available to us all possible news sources so we can do that. So we can do our shopping. We can go down the smorgasbord, basically the buffet of news, and pick out everything we want and see what is good and what isn't, and decide for ourselves what is tasty and what isn't. And in my analogy there. Now, is this doing Canadians any favor? There is a vast reduction in the amount of news available to the average Canadian because of the power of social media. And once Facebook shuts off journalism to Canadians like that, as they say, to comply with the law, the federal government says, well, you know what, you're posting our news, the journalism of Canadians, so you got to pay for it. And if you do that, you got to pay for it. Well, what Facebook says, well, we just won't post it, which gives us a situation.
The other thing is there's a decline of approximately 11 million fewer views per day on Facebook and Instagram, means that Canadians are encountering fewer sources of legitimate news.
Yes, and that is a big problem. On the other hand, Google isn't paying for it. Or not Google. Google looks like they intend to pay for it, but they're still resisting it. Now, each one of the social media, and particularly Facebook, says it does a service to the news media by allowing posts of their stuff on their feeds. They don't pay revenue for that, but they help people direct their views towards that source of media. Let's say somebody posts something from the Star on social media, on Facebook, and you start reading it, and you could, oh, okay, and then you could direct your attention to that. Otherwise, you might not have seen it because.
But again, here's the thing: I can't help wondering that the government, the government and this, the government and the news industry have kind of shot themselves in the foot. Because if I'm searching for something that's on, if I'm searching for something and I'm looking out there and there's one company that's got this stuff and it's a corporate website and it's a .ca website versus a .com website versus a .de website, I wouldn't necessarily know where these actual websites were, but yet I'm searching for X, and I find X in these three corporate websites. Right, corporate websites are unaffected by this. Corporate websites also don't want to share of the pie, and corporate websites, I can still find the relevant Canadian sources.
Yeah, if we draw a direct causal line from the legislation to Meta's decision to the findings, I don't think there's anyone who would say this as being a net positive for Canadian journalism or Canadian population to this point. It says,
no, it isn't.
Yeah. So there's got this is I can't, I don't want to be so negative, but this seems to be just another blunder by the Canadian government.
Yes.
I think they were trying to shadow or do what the same thing the Australian government did. Now, the Australian government had to go through this whole thing again. They said, okay, Facebook, okay, Google, you got to pay up. You're taking too much of our or taking advantage of our journalists too much. So Facebook did that. They shut it down, did the same thing they're doing here. And Google, doing the same thing it is doing here, is trying to negotiate a deal. But the Australians came to an agreement with Facebook, something equitable. Why haven't we done that? Why haven't we been able to come to Facebook and come up with some sort of deal for revenue sharing of some sort? Now, they did it in Australia, and Facebook did exactly the same tactic. They shut down all news that went on their site as best they could. I mean, you could still do screenshots, and that's one of the things that the government is pointing out. They still do screenshots, so you're still sharing our stuff. But of course, how is Meta going to be able to police a screenshot? It can police. It can police a web page that's being posted on us, but it can't do a screenshot. Now, at least not yet. And
well, the other thing that I notice that people are doing is A, a screenshot, and B, text copies. And text copies, by the way, guys, are illegal. It's a breach of copyright, and you could be taken to court for that.
Well, I think just about everybody's done it one way or another, and as long as it doesn't get out of hand, I don't think you'll be pursued. Mike Cushman, our listener, says Canadian government are horrible negotiators. Well, yeah. I mean, I think we took a beating on the free trade deal we had with the U.S. And Peter Biker says, COVID collateral. Where do we go for truth? Is the latest documentary directed by Vanessa Delin attempting to tackle this brutal situation. Highly recommended. Well, there you go. There's you need a variety of news sources to be able to make up your mind one way or another. Like many people decided, for instance, not to get a vaccine. I knew them, and they were reasonable people. They weren't the ones talking about talking about a conspiracy. They just doubted whether or not it would be good for them to get it. The vaccine.
I mean, I was in the same situation. I was in the same situation. I've never, with a vaccine that's rushed through like this, I'm not sure of its, that it's good for my health.
See, I had a different view that this wasn't rushed through. That the basic technology for it has been around for a very long time, and it was the RNH thing. All they needed to do was set it up for that particular virus. So so when I got my vaccines, I had one of the old-fashioned kind. I think there was the AstraZeneca one, I think, or you could have got the Johnson & Johnson one. That was the old-fashioned kind too. But there was the old-fashioned kinds that were the worst ones, like the typical based on old technology, where they take a dead virus and put it in you, and then your body picks up an immunity from the dead virus, like all other vaccines up until now have done. And the RNH, anyway, we can get into that some other time. But right now, you have to have a wide variety of news sources. And right now, and that is essential, because the news agencies, let's say something like Fox or CNN, well, particularly Fox, will focus on a particular demographic group. It'll feed them information it knows that demographic group likes. And then to draw in more and more listenership or readership, it allows marginal unscientific views to come up on its media, in order to feed conspiracy ideas and frighten people and everything. So they'll target a certain demographic, whereas they're not really concerned about the news at all. Reagan took away the true news. There was a law that said that news had to be fair. And Reagan took that away. And once he took that away, it opened up the door for seriously agenda-driven news stations. So we, as the public, we have to filter through all that stuff. We have to pick and choose what pieces of truth are this or that media. And if we're not exposed to it through a place like Facebook, which is ubiquitous, how do we get it? That's the argument coming from people who study this. On the other hand, how do you compensate those news agencies?
Yeah. Okay. The other question here, though, is that the public at large, according to this study, only 22% of Canadians are even aware that a ban exists. So that means everybody here listening to this show today is among that 22% of Canadians, right? The more educated of the 22% of Canadians who know the ban exists, right?
Yeah, and being someone who pursues the news, like I have time to do it, of course, because I tried to when I was working, but I'm much more informed now that I've retired, because I can view a lot of different news sources. But of course, the people that don't know what's happened is the ones that haven't been informed. It's 22%. Well, now with the ban that Facebook has, it could be more like 83%, according to this here, that wouldn't know that this law was even trying to be enacted.
It's 88% that don't know about the law.
88%?
Yeah, it's 22%.
Only 22% no. Okay.
Yeah, only 22% know this exists, right?
That in itself is a good statistic. That itself is a good statistic. So it shows you how news is not well disseminated. That's a very, very important rule, because that could be thought of as censorship or a means of censorship in a democracy. And I think that's what the Poilievre government was trying to make a point on. The negotiators, though, like Mike Cushman says, we didn't need to really go this far. There could be negotiations happen, and So the Canadian government came down with a heavy hand and made it look like it's boss man, and we're really looking out for the interests of Canadian journalism. But it didn't leave itself much room to negotiate. It's negotiating with Google, but this has gone on for quite a while now. How come it's such a clumsy bit of legislation? How come the Australians could resolve it as quick as they did and we can't? Those are my questions.
Yeah.
Like, I would like to compensate, come up with some kind of fair deal that both Facebook and the journalist industry, the news industry can live with pretty quick, because obviously people find a lot of worthy news on Facebook, and on Facebook you can get all kinds of junk. I remember when that David Hogg guy was being crucified in the right-wing news back after the Parkland shooting, and it was really good that you had real stuff coming out to balance it. And if I don't know, it's very important.
We still get the junk today.
That's right. And as I said before, news to nowadays, there's very few news sources you can rely on for objective news. And that's because they're all fighting for revenue. And Murdoch, in his genius, realized that he could do what CNN had done earlier much better. And what he did was he targeted a certain audience. He knew that he could get a massive revenue stream if he targets a certain demographic and feed them what they like to hear. Conspiracies and all this other stuff and exaggerations of this and that. Everybody knows Fox News is a pile of rubbish, but in and amongst it, they would have little bits of truth in order to validate the rest of their argument. So if you're a good news consumer, you could see, okay, well, yeah, that part of it's true, but their conclusions of that aren't, that kind of thing. So it's like a buffet. The news is like a big buffet, a smorgasbord. So you got to walk along that table and pick out what's good and what's not.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that has to be available for Canadians. And right now, it seems that one of the prime availabilities is, unfortunately, social media. So why isn't Canada, and this has been going on for months now, so why hasn't Canada been able to cut a deal with Facebook? Facebook is doing exactly the same tactics they did in Australia, and probably the same tactics they did anywhere else. And those arguments, those things were resolved. So Facebook is paying journalists in Australia, as far as I know, and Google definitely is. So they came up with a deal. How did they come up with a deal? And how come we cannot?
Okay, Mike points out, I like the pointer. Well-written stories that are not censored, like the other papers.
I think we should go right there right now.
I don't like the pointer because it doesn't allow me to highlight the stuff that I need to be talking about on news right now. And while we're there, let's go directly to the pointer and actually talk about Mike. And 6 weeks after complaints began, chemicals are still leaking into the Welland River. So Mike made these initial complaints to the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, MECP, and there's still leaking. And the last that I heard, he'd found the leak at one point.
Well, he at least he traced it back to closer to where it is. I see the ministry. Closer. I see the ministry like they were so good. They came down and looked at it and says, "Oh, it seems to be ebbing now, so we'll go away." Like that's the impression I got from the article, that the ministry came down, looked at it, and said, "Oh, well, it seems like it's dissipating now." And Mike didn't let that stop him. He kept digging and digging and digging. So why didn't the ministry trace this back? They're supposed to be the experts. They're supposed to look at this and kind of determine where this is coming from. So they had a look at it and said, "Oh yeah," and I don't know what's with that. I mean, I might have got the wrong impression from the article, but it's being Mike Mike, he's the one that's pursuing it. He's the one that has determined that this is a chemical leak, and he keeps pushing the government or the ministry to look into it. And he's the one that tracked it down the river. He's the one that was got closer to the source, not the ministry. How come?
Yeah. Because he's a caring, responsible local individual. That's why.
And here it is. Here
Okay.
we are 6 to 7 weeks after the leak was reported, and it's still here. It's still happening. I come here constantly to check the sheen still flows, and the sheen still flows. I doubt anybody will ever be held accountable for this, Cushman says, standing at the edge of the Welland River where the source of the leak appears to come from, a subterranean pipe south of Don Murray Street, an industrial area that houses a number of businesses that could be the source. Yes, I think there's an industrial area there. Did the ministry go to that industrial area? Did they check the pipes coming out of that industrial area? I don't know what the ministry does. I get the impression that the ministry is being forced to look at this. They'd rather just not see it at all. Inspections of the industries of the area may influence the storm sewers are ongoing, ministry spokesman told the Pointer. I don't know how, I really don't have a whole lot of confidence in the ministry. I mean, they're not dissing the ministry in this article at all. They haven't come down and judgmentally on it. But in my mind, they by reading it, this could be a major thing. Like this could be just the sort of the wind before the storm kind of thing. Wherever that source is coming from, it might be just leaking out now, but it could flood right out of there at one time or another. Who knows? It could do a hell of a lot of damage, and it could be just the harbinger of bad things to come.
By the way, not just Mike, but we have to also thank Janet Krochuk and Sarah Ward for filing their reports with the ministry as well.
Thank you, ladies. Yeah, Mike that's right. In the article, they submitted a number of issues towards the ministry.
Yeah,
I'm glad the ministry
Mike
responded.
has been one of the most vocal about this, so it is important.
Hats off to Mike and those two ladies for doing their due diligence. Who else would do that? I don't know.
And it's like what bothers me about this is we've not had any real cleanup of it, right? There was they found a gooey oily blob on around about July 8th. A hazardous material contractor was dispatched to the site, and a large vacuum truck was used to suck up the substance and other surface contamination, while an absorbent sock boom was placed over the outfall. But yet it's still coming. It's still leaking.
Yeah. I just so after the first visit, this is what I'm talking about. After the first visit, ministry staff concluded that there was a leak somewhere along the river. It could be intermittent in nature. Also suggested the source could have been a boater being careless with fuel. Seriously, that it was the stupidest conclusion ever. A boater, right? A boater. Careless with fuel. How long has that boater been in the river? How long has this been dumping this fuel? 6, 7 weeks?
Yeah, but careless with fuel is a day, is a day or 2 or 3 or 4, right? Not 6 weeks.
Yeah, and so and this is what my problem was. So the ministry said the boater causes careless with fuel. Whatever it was, it appeared to be dissipating. Well, no, it wasn't. Now, Cushman and Ward were not convinced, returning to the site numerous times, taking photographs, videos, sending them to the ministry in the days that followed. The unmistakable smell and rainbow sheen on the water were getting worse. Oh, well done ministry. Oh, well, it was a boater. We got to walk away now. Upstream and could be reported the findings. That's what I'm meaning. This could be the harbinger of things terrible to happen. Whatever's leaking there, if wherever it's coming from, and there's a breach of whatever tanker or whatever it is, it could make it a huge problem. It's the ministry says trace it back to make sure that the potential leak doesn't get worse. The leak is repaired, and whatever potential leak doesn't get worse. That's my, I mean, it could be coming from a leaky old rusty tank that will burst one day. And this is your warning that might happen. Responding to the photos and reports that continue to come in, and armed with Cushman's discovery of the potential source, the ministry returned to the site on July 8th in what was described by the ministry as a gooey, oily, blah, 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 blah. So why didn't they find it? Why didn't they do enough investigation? They said, probably a boater that was careless with this fuel. We could turn our back on this one. Well, good thing for Mike and his Confederates here, right? Nothing would have been done. The ministry would have just written it off and gone back to their office and smoked marijuana cigarettes and did the conga dance. Dun, 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 dun. So he got them out of their office and he got them on site. So maybe something will be done.
And by the way, also, I'm going to have to point out that a reporter for the Pointer is none other than Ed Smith, who has been a well-known local activist in the
an investigator. Yeah, he's done he's done a really good job here writing this up, and he was and the way I like the way he's written it. He's not pointing any mean fingers like I'm saying right now with the way I'm talking. They're very annoyed at the ministry for their cavalier approach to this. It seems to me they had to be dragged out of the ministry kicking and screaming, and then once they came, they dipped their toe in the water and ran away. And if it wasn't for guys like with Mike and the two ladies with him, then they would have got left undone. And Peter Biker says, how exactly did they measure an ebb in the flow of those toxic chemicals that were flowing into the Welland River? Sounds fishy. I don't know.
Same here.
I don't know. I don't know, Mr. Biker.
Yep. Sounds fishy to me as well. And I think the MECP needs to answer to this. Okay, Mike continues. They're allowing the leak to still happen. The city is putting filters and socks out there once a week. And further, the MEC is calling it a lubricant. They don't even know what it is yet. A coolant? Question mark.
Well, if it's a lubricant, it's going to be some sort of oil. Obviously, it's coming from an industrial park. Obviously, right? What else? Yeah. Like, I mean, it's a 90% chance it's coming from the industrial park. Where else would it have come from? Unless there was an environmental dump spot there. Maybe somebody over the years, many years ago, would dump old oil there.
That's a possibility.
Just to get rid of it. That's a possibility.
Yeah, that's a possibility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's all. Yeah, but most likely it's coming from the industrial park there, and something is leaking into the. What you're supposed to do nowadays in industry is you don't flush things down the sewer like you used to. You used to wash the floors of the steel mill or something, and it would just drain off into the bay or wherever else. Now it has to go through a process where the chemical parts are separated and the water's clean before it goes into the bay or wherever it goes, into the sewer.
Yeah.
So something I have a
it's like how at home, maybe in the 60s and 70s you just when you drained your car of oil and you replaced it, you did your own personal oil change. and you just dumped it down the local sewer drains, back in the 60s and 70s. Well, we don't do that anymore. We're not permitted to do that anymore.
Absolutely not. And you never know what's going to happen. There was a store that sold cheeses and some kind of ethnic food. I won't mention the ethnic. It was European ethnic food that's very popular here. The store is very popular here in town. It's a great store. But it was dumping, when it was making its cheese and stuff, it was dumping its whey or something about its the waste fluids from its cheeses into the sewers. Now, normally that probably wouldn't have been that bad, but in this particular case, it reacted with the type of sewer that was there. It could have been, it was probably the worst thing they could have dumped down in it, because it had a chemical reaction with the sewer linings, and that all had to be replaced. So something even as innocuous as organic material that you figure would go into the sewer system and not really affect it that much because it's organic, you just get dissipated. It had a negative effect on the sewer, and the sewer had to be replaced. Though the discharge from that store to the street.
Mike has also concluded that it came from the right pipe in the industrial park, and he showed MECP and the city proof of this, and he has a blueprint of the companies attached. There's about 10 or 12 companies attached to that pipe.
Well, then the investigation goes. The first thing you do is which one is the most industrial, which one is the most that would use oils and lubricants, who's got a fleet of trucks, or who's got machines that would take that kind of thing. Is there a leak? I'll tell you now that there is, in Welland, where the old Welland pipe plant is, the ground is saturated with glycol. It is absolutely saturated. They had and I think also hydraulic oil. For years and years and years, they had a leak, an old leak underneath, somewhere underneath. They couldn't determine where it was. So they had to keep filling up their reservoir of hydraulics and glycol, I think. I'm pretty sure it was glycol, could be hydraulics or both. And that leak just kept leaking out into the ground. And it just kept doing that. And I'm pretty sure the ministry wasn't aware of it, and they couldn't do anything about it because they didn't know where the leak was. But the leak was slow enough that it really didn't affect their production or cost that much. But it went on for decades. So that old land under that old pipe mill, Welland Pipe, now it closed down. If anyone starts digging there, they're gonna find a gusher of contaminants, I'm sure.
Right. Okay, so no, Peter Biker said the new issue echoes the shades of the infamous Love Canal debacle that occurred decades earlier, and Mike points out that yes, only 2 miles away from across the Niagara River, so not that far, No,
not at all. Yeah. And Love Canal came out as something that was extremely polluted, but when everybody started looking at it, we were almost as polluted as they were, because we had chemical plants on this side as well.
Yeah, exactly.
That wouldn't surprise Mike at all, I don't think.
No. Okay, so moving on. Mosquito virus has prompted U.S. towns to close parks in dozens of U.S. towns. So 10 communities in Massachusetts are designated high or critical risk for an Eastern equine encephalitis, or EEE, that spreads through the bite of an infected mosquito.
Yes, and it is deadly. It reminds me of Japanese encephalitis. When I was in Southeast Asia, if a mosquito bit you and they had Japanese encephalitis, you're a dead person. They did have a vaccine for it, but it cost $600 and it was only moderately effective. Yeah, we now have the city is restricting people from going to a place where this particular mosquito hangs out, and the virus that it could implant in you is potentially deadly. in fact, quite deadly. I think the
Well, it says if infected, between 30 to 70, 33 to 70% of people will die from the virus.
Yeah, that is pretty heavy, and
yeah,
and
death
I could see all kinds
quickly.
I can see all kinds of conspiracy theories start out of this again. They're gonna, you know, especially if they search for some kind of source that can cure this or a vaccine for it. Just like when monkeypox, we talked about monkeypox and its source of near conspiracy there. But this is very urgent because it is deadly, and it will come here, unfortunately. I mean, we get West Nile virus. I don't think we got Zika up here yet, but we got West Nile virus. In fact, the celebrated or scorned, depending on your point of view, Dr. Fauci's had West Nile virus, actually. He's recovering from that, and that's usually airborne by mosquitoes.
Yeah. And this basically, you think about it, Massachusetts is only probably less than 500 miles away from here, right?
Similar weather. Like you can't say, well, yeah.
Exactly.
So the bug that lives in Massachusetts will live here.
And similar conditions, probably similar parks, similar, very similar weather, similar the possibility that it can breed. Yeah, absolutely.
This is called, of course, triple E. The virus is called triple E. Of course, it's got a lot longer name, Eastern equine encephalitis.
That's what I struggled over with. Was the name beforehand, right?
The encephalitis part means it goes to your brain, pretty much, I think. Any other encephalitis, I think, that usually swell a brain, I believe. It might not be limited to that. But as I know, when I was in Southeast Asia, like I said, in the northern part of the country there, if you get bit by a mosquito that happens to have Japanese encephalitis, that's a death sentence. And if you are vaccinated against, and like I say, a vaccination costs over $600, and that was back in 2016. So I don't know. And Mike Cushman says West Nile virus is here in Niagara, it seems. Yeah, fun.
It has been around. Now, the interesting thing about this, and it's important that we see these things. There have only been 17 reported cases in human beings of triple E, and 7 deaths that have occurred in 2019, 2020. But it's easy to assume that, hey, we're not going to get it, but it's just that's taking care.
Now, here's the symptoms. It really doesn't help me much. It is diarrhea, fever, headache, seizures, vomiting, according to the CDC. Well, that's like every flu, almost, the same thing. The EEE is rare but serious disease and the public health concern. We want to remind residents the need to protect themselves from mosquito bites, especially in areas of the state where we're seeing EEE activity. A horse in Plymouth, in Plymouth, Massachusetts, got it, which raised alarm bells. A man in his 80s was the first to be infected and diagnosed on the 16th of August. If he was in his 80s, he most likely died because you'd only have a 50-50 chance at best if you're young. Yeah. So that's something we have. That's part of our good news story. We don't have it yet. And of course, that's the only good news we could tell you about this particular article. It's over there. It's not here yet.
Well, as Mike pointed out, then pointing out in this article, cases of West Nile has also been reported in the same area.
Well, yeah, like I said, Dr. Fauci himself has got West Nile.
Yeah. and we've talked about that before. Okay, so directly from what we were talking about, basically, there's a report out there today that thousands of international students are facing deportation from Canada.
Yeah, this is a reverberation of the new rules in which the Canadian government is clamping down on workers and students, foreign workers and students. Sometimes they overlap because once the students are in university, they begin to work, and then after they are out of university, then they get in. They're a foreign worker basically in the country. They haven't got their citizenship. They're trying to get towards their citizenship, but they're working. And as they're doing that, of course, they're taking jobs from other people that could have had them. So you can't blame them. They spent a lot of money getting to Canada. And sometimes, like we have pointed out here, sometimes they get sucked into the diploma mills. There are agents in India. In most of these, in this article, most of the people in it are from the subcontinent. Most of the protesters. So you have a lot of these student protesters, in this particular case in PEI, and I think also in Manitoba, demanding fairness, saying, look, we spent all this money coming here. We were the carrot was dangled in front of us. Come here, get your education, and then apply for citizenship, and your life will be much better. What the Canadian government is saying is, well, we can't do that anymore.
Yeah. And the point being is that they were obviously fed a line. And by the way, it's also Ontario and British Columbia is impacted by this as well.
Right? Oh, hugely. But the protest in the article, it comes from PEI, of all places.
Yeah.
So what we have is foreign students are filling up all our colleges, private or public, all across the country, even in PEI. And then once they get out, they try to fast track themselves towards citizenship, and there's a point system that gets them there. Now, I talked to the guy who sold me this phone. He's a guy from northern Pakistan that actually lived in Qatar. That's where his home was, and then he came here, hoped to get into Canada. He's finished his schooling, but he doesn't have enough points. And in his attitude was he'd wait to see if he got enough points. I think this would be a guy that you'd want because his English was very good. His education was high. So you know that he would fit into the society quite well. But in the meantime, he's working selling me phones. So why isn't a resident of Canada in that basically? But anyway, he was there doing that, and he was doing his due diligence. He's a good lad. And the kind of guy you think would be a pretty good Canadian. But he said he didn't have enough of the point system. And his attitude, well, Canada's not the only place in the world I can go. He came from Qatar. He could go back there. He could try Australia, New Zealand, some other place. But he's an educated man that knows English and can't quite make the point system. And this particular these people are complaining.
It's the same with this. One of the people interviewed in this article. I spent the most crucial 6 years of my life taking many risks to come to Canada. A former international student said, who's facing deportation. For the last 6 years, he studied, he worked, he paid taxes, earned enough for enough CRS comprehensive ranking system points, but the government has just taken advantage of us, right? That's their complaint.
I don't think so, and that could be hyperbole too. You're going to find that each one of these students, or many of them, are going to play the persecution card. I took, what is true though, is a lot of them get sucked into coming here by agents in India or other places in the world who promise them the yellow brick road. We'll get you in. You pay us money. We'll get you in. We'll get you into a college. We'll kind of doctor up this application form here. Okay, you didn't finish high school. Well, we'll fix that. You did. Your marks are like around 60. Well, we'll make sure that they get 80. We'll pay off the the school teacher over there to give you another written report, all these kind of things, whatever it needs to be, get to Canada. And the idea is once they get here, that's what they figure it is. Like I remember this too, because when I was in Libya, there was a guy there trying to help his brother get to Canada so he could study. He felt once he was in Canada, everything would be okay. But to get him there was the main thing. So he was asking me all the different things I needed to do or that could help him get there. And he was looking for connections like happens in the Arab world. If you have a connection someplace, you can sort of override all necessary qualifications you might need for that job. You can get in there because you've got a connection, and you scratch my back, because that's how it works there. If you're in the police force and your cousin needs a job, and he's really not the smartest guy in the world, but they need a job, so you get them a job, and look over other better applicants. So this is they think once they get here, their problems are going to be solved. To qualify to get here doesn't really matter. It's to get here. That's the thing.
Okay, then the other question that they're saying here is that at first there were they have these things called Canadian Experience Class, CEC. There's a draw every couple of weeks, or there used to be a draw every couple of weeks. So they wouldn't necessarily get in on one draw, but they would by drawing from that selection, the potential was that they could get their visas, etc., sorted out. Now they don't know when the next draw is going to be. There are huge backlogs in terms of getting into that system, and that's what the part of the complaints are about.
Yeah, and they are upset because they feel that the government has kind of turned their back on them, that the housing and all the other problems we're having right now, not enough healthcare, especially not enough housing, is not their fault. They say it was other factors. They're being blamed for a lot of this that they didn't bring on. But you can't deny the fact that if we have more people than we have houses, then the government's made a mistake. In fact, we have another article here. I don't think we'll be able to get to it. That pretty much, or we could maybe, but it pretty much says the same thing. The Liberal government is now adapting conservative talking points. They're kind of disguising a bit, making it look as if they're not conservative talking points. But what they're saying is they're going to reduce the number of even residents in the country. So it looks as if they're committed to another 1 million people in the coming in the next couple of years. But it looks like they're going to rethink that and reduce the number and pick up on a conservative talking points that say we don't have enough healthcare, we don't have enough housing for the amount of people you're bringing in. And of course, that includes students. Yeah. So if you add the students to the amount of people coming into the country each year, that's 1 million people, 1 million more people. Our population has gone to 41 million now. It's gone from 37 million just a few years ago to 41 million right now. And we don't have the capacity to take care of it. And the same thing's happening in the States, by the way, too. It's not in one of the problems with the illegals coming over the border is where are you going to put them? Where are you going to house them? So what the governments have done is just load them up in buses and taking them every town around. I mean, very rural, out of the way towns are finding themselves waking up in the morning with a busload of refugees in their town. And think, what's this all about? It's just like the Ontario government taking the refugees and dumping them in Niagara Falls. There's hotel rooms here.
Yeah. And probably those rural communities have got 0 hotel rooms and 0 spare housing.
Yes.
And no housing starts going on at all.
Yeah. So where are you going to put them? Like these students, I would be, I would be incensed too if I was a student. What I thought was my El Dorado, my fast track to a better life, that door is closing. That yellow brick road is getting farther and farther away, and so.
And you come here, you've come here and you've done everything right, so to speak. You've studied, you've got your exams, you've you're trying to take it to the next level. The trouble is, as you said, education, even in a Canadian university, doesn't guarantee that you've got the right to stay.
No, it doesn't. As I told you about the guy that sold me that phone. I mean, to me, he would have been a prime candidate to stay in Canada because he had university education right here in Canada. He spoke English very well. And yet he didn't have enough points. He says one of the biggest factors is he doesn't have a relative here. Anyone that comes here, and that's something that's not mentioned here. If you have a relative here, these agencies can get you in and tell you, look, if you got a relative there, there's already points for you, because if you have a relative living in Canada, you immediately get points in this point system.
Yeah.
So you're already ahead of everyone else if you have a relative here. My fifth cousin on my mother's side,
Yeah. Even if that relative isn't aware you're coming, it gives you a leg up.
Yeah, it's in Canada. So you could be up in Baffin Island. Your relative could be up in Baffin Island, and you'd be, of course, in Toronto, or where almost all these immigrants come, is Ontario, and then to a lesser extent BC. But the plain truth of it is, it seems like the Liberals are picking up on the consistent conservative talking points, probably to reduce the effectiveness of those talking points, for one thing, but also it's a practical thing. The language has changed. We want to do what is best for Canadians, what Canadians are telling us. Well, they had 9 years to do that. They haven't really. They've their whole attitude is changing. Their whole demeanor is changing. They're looking and talking more like conservatives now.
Yeah. Well, and let's go on to that other one. I'm probably going to have to. We might come back to this story. So the immigration minister says that upcoming changes to permanent resident.
You had to leave early. I thought you had to leave early.
Yeah, I'm seemingly okay, but nobody's, yeah. But basically, so the immigration minister is saying, we'll come back to this tomorrow, that the permanent resident levels are not cosmetic. They're going to be changes to these. They're very, very significant changes that they're going to be putting in place. So I guess that we can kind of end it there, and we'll pick up on that tomorrow.
Yeah, well, it makes me laugh because here's the quote. Now it's time to take a look at them and put real options on the table for the prime minister and for the other cabinet ministers to look at, and not cosmetic changes simply to deal with public opinion. Real significant change, Miller said. Well, that could have happened. This has been a looming problem for a very long time. But next year's elections, they better pick up on whatever.
And real significant change could be as much as closing the door and locking it, basically.
That's what I think. I mean, I don't know how they don't see the fact that we don't have enough houses and we don't have enough health care because our population is growing faster than we can accommodate it.
Yeah. I'm not saying that's where we need to go, but we have significant problems that we need to deal with first.
Yeah, I think probably cutting the immigration by half, and that was the rumor, by about 60 to 60% of what it is, back to previous levels, so that we could catch up. I think if you really wanted to catch up, you'd have to turn off the immigration stream to probably 100 or 150,000 until we can catch up, build houses, all that.
Yeah.
We'll see. Anyway, whatever it is, it would be a huge disappointment for anybody lining up to get into the country, and a huge motivation for illegals to try to cross the border too. So without further ado,
the illegals are part of the problem. That's part of the issue we face. Anyway, we can come back to that tomorrow.
Without further ado, I bid you adieu.